Today we're going to talk about discussions in e-learning, principles and best practice. Our learning objectives today: to understand best practices for facilitating online learning through discussions. And most of what I'll be thinking about as we're doing this, we're talking about asynchronous and synchronous discussions that can happen online in e-learning. And mostly what I'll be thinking about are the asynchronous ones, the ones that happen, develop over time in the discussion boards and so on. This is partly because online learning is intended to overcome the challenges of both space and time. And if you're holding synchronous discussions for your students each week at a specific time, it does reduce the accessibility and flexibility to the course. Although synchronous discussions are also a good thing to have as part of your course. Today we'll be looking at discussions with a mind towards the asynchronous discussions. We'll understand discussions in learning and look at some principles and practices. So let's begin. Discussions really are a best practice, student-centered learning model with long-standing pedagogical support. Long-standing meaning it goes back quite a ways to the Socratic method. The phrase I like is cooperative, argumentative dialogue. It happens between individuals based on asking and answering questions to stimulate critical thinking and draw out ideas and underlying presumptions. This was developed by John Dewey, rooted in his practical inquiry, encouraging students to exercise reflective practice, which is really a cooperative argument dialogue between individuals based on asking and answering questions to stimulate problem solving and deeper thinking. Laprade writes, according to Farrell, as early as 1933, John Dewey encouraged teachers to make informed decisions based on systematic and conscious reflections rather than fleeting thoughts about teaching. And he maintained that when teachers combine these systematic reflections with their actual teaching experiences, then they can become more aware, which can lead to professional development. This community of inquiry was further developed by Garrison, Anderson, and Archer, looking at the different presences that happen within a course: the social presence, the cognitive presence, and the teaching presence. And through the interaction of these three core elements, then learning occurs. Cognitive presence indicators include a sense of puzzlement, information exchange, connecting ideas, and applying new ideas. The indicators for social presence, things like emoticons, risk-free expression, encouraging collaboration. And for the teaching presence, indicators include defining and initiating discussion topics, sharing personal meaning, and focusing discussion, with the end goal of creating an engaged online learner. Craney, Wallace, Alexander, and Alfano say, as a result of this increased interaction, students understand the concepts to a greater depth, develop a firmer foundation in core competencies, as well as earn a higher grade in the course. Now we'll take a look at some principles and practices from Michelle Miller's Minds Online, Teaching Effectively with Technology. This is an excellent book that I encourage all of you to read, that at the end lays out quite a number of principles and practices. And today I'm just focusing on the ones that specifically have to do with online discussions. First principle we're going to focus on is focusing on meaning rather than superficial qualities promotes memory as well as understanding. This particularly is true when people relate the information to themselves. In the practice, discussion assignments that require leading and or summarizing discussion threads. Minds Online goes out to talk about two different roles: a starter role that would give a student the responsibility of starting the conversations, creating good questions that would help the other students think critically and respond intelligently. And then assign another student a wrapper role that would give them the responsibility of wrapping up the conversation at a certain point. This student would create a summary of the discussions and try to highlight the main points of the student discussion. Another practice is online discussions built around experiences from students' own lives. And this again is back to that idea of the students will best relate to the information if they can relate it back to themselves. The next principle is memory for new information is powerfully shaped by what we already know. That is, we fit things into our existing framework. One practice is discussion prompts asking students to relate new information to old information. Next principle is discussions can be surprisingly powerful learning experiences when designed and managed the right way. And the practice, discussions that start and end at set times, short, tightly focused discussions that unfold over 2 weeks or less, maybe an icebreaker or getting to know you discussion threads. Not every discussion thread has to be graded or directly related to the information. And it is important to give explicit civility guidelines as you guide and as you develop your online discussions. Another practice is frequent lurking and as-needed intervention by the instructor to keep threads on track and civil. Now this could be like the picture example to take care of any major problems with language or with attitudes within the discussion thread, but it also could be simply to correct some errors. An example might be, however, only to chime in when you've given significant time for the other students to be able to also chime in and correct. Another practice, grading rubrics for discussion posts. And this is just an example of a quick, small rubric that could be used for a discussion post, giving points for the original thought, cited source, and responding to other students. And the practice of having discussions tied to structured activities such as problem-based learning or case studies. The next, last, and probably most important principle is encouraging higher order thinking. Now this idea comes from Bloom's taxonomy, which was revised by Krathwohl in 2002. It starts with remember on the bottom, recalling facts and figures, then understanding what those facts mean, applying the facts, rules, or concepts and ideas. Analyzing is to break down the information into parts. To evaluate means to judge that information or ideas. And then create would combine the parts to make a new whole, solve problems with new solutions. And the idea is to get students thinking deeper, more critically, and to move them up the scale of taxonomy into deeper thinking. Critical thinking abilities are enhanced by encouraging students to comment on their peers' online discussion postings. They learn to challenge their assumptions and to provide a rationale for their responses. So the practice here, problem-based discussions. Creating discussions that, again, would set out some sort of problem that the students would have to discuss and talk about how they would solve. And encouraging that higher order thinking to apply to that problem solving. Another practice is guidelines that emphasize critical thinking and presentation of evidence. Now, one simple idea is simply including this into your rubric. So whatever you want the students to achieve, that you would lay out in your rubric so that they could be clearly guided towards not just responding to 2 students, but responding to 2 other students, deepening the discussion. You know, online discussions work. In-depth online discussions help students gain a new understanding of course-related subjects, emphasizing an increased motivation due to real-time interaction and feedback, as well as increased interpersonal connections. So now to practice the practice. Right now, why don't you stop this clip and write down somehow, create an example discussion post applying these principles and practices. Down below, I will provide a link that will allow you to download the PowerPoint if you wish to do that. Flip through the notes and just right now, while you're thinking about, create an example discussion post applying these principles and practices. I hope this was helpful. Thank you for watching. Continue to learn and continue to help your students to learn by increasing the depth of your discussion posts and using some of these principles and practices as you teach.